Victoria Ashford stood frozen in the middle of Lars Anderson Park on an October afternoon. Her 5-year-old son Ethan had just opened his mouth and spoken his first word in 2 years. Not to the team of million-dollar specialists she had assembled, but to a complete stranger crouching before him, holding a beetle in his weathered palm. "Bug," Ethan said, his voice rough and scratchy from disuse. Victoria's knees buckled. 2 years, 12 specialists, countless nights crying alone in the dark, and all it took was a stranger in the park. 2 years earlier, everything had been different. Ethan Ashford was a bright, curious 3-year-old who never stopped talking. He asked questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to why dogs wagged their tails. His grandmother Margaret adored him, and on that particular Tuesday afternoon, she had picked him up from preschool while Victoria finished a board meeting at Ashford Media Group. The truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. His 18-wheeler crossed 3 lanes of traffic before slamming into the passenger side of Margaret's sedan. Ethan, strapped into his car seat behind his grandmother, watched as the impact threw her forward, as blood pooled beneath her silver hair, as her eyes closed and stayed closed. Emergency responders found him sitting in perfect silence, his small hand reaching through the gap between seats toward his grandmother's motionless body. Margaret survived. After 3 surgeries and 8 months of rehabilitation, she walked again, spoke again, laughed again. But something in her grandson had broken in a way no surgeon could repair. From the moment the paramedics pulled him from that car, Ethan Ashford stopped speaking entirely. Victoria consulted every expert money could buy: speech-language pathologists from Boston Children's Hospital, child psychologists with waiting lists stretching years into the future, play therapists who charged $400 an hour to watch her son stack blocks in silence. The diagnosis came quickly enough: a condition called selective mutism triggered by severe psychological trauma. The prognosis was less clear. Some children recovered within months, others took years. Richard Whitmore, Victoria's husband of 8 years, grew increasingly impatient as the months stretched on. He was a venture capitalist who had married Victoria partly for her sharp mind and partly for her family's media empire. What he had not bargained for was a son who refused to perform the basic social functions expected of a Whitmore heir. The final argument came on a Thursday night, 11 months after the accident. Victoria had just returned from another fruitless therapy session when she found Richard packing a suitcase. "I didn't sign up for this," he said without looking at her. "I didn't sign up to raise a broken child." Victoria felt something cold settle in her chest. "Get out," she said quietly. Richard finally met her eyes, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. He found neither. Just the same steel that had made Ashford Media a billion-dollar company under her leadership. "The divorce papers will be ready by Monday," she continued. "Don't bother fighting for custody. We both know you don't actually want it." The divorce was finalized in 6 months. Richard got a generous settlement and visitation rights he never exercised. Victoria got everything else, including sole custody of a son who looked at her each day with eyes that held entire conversations his mouth refused to release. She learned to read those eyes. The slight crinkle that meant he was happy. The downward cast that signaled exhaustion. The intense focus that appeared whenever he spotted an insect, because somewhere in the silence of his trauma, Ethan had developed a fascination with bugs. He collected picture books about them, watched nature documentaries with the volume muted, and spent hours in the backyard observing ants and beetles with scientific intensity. Victoria ran Ashford Media with an iron hand by day, managing 2,000 employees across 12 offices, negotiating deals that made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. But every night, she sat beside Ethan's bed and sang the songs he used to love, hoping that one day he might join in, hoping for any sound at all. On this particular October morning, Victoria made a decision. She canceled Ethan's 11 o'clock therapy appointment and drove to Lars Anderson Park instead. "Maybe you need Sky more than you need another doctor's office," she whispered as she unbuckled his car seat. Ethan looked at her with those expressive eyes, his face revealing nothing. But as they walked toward the park's winding paths, his small hand squeezed hers just a little tighter. Marcus Cole sat on a wooden bench, watching his 6-year-old daughter Lily chase something through the fallen leaves. The October air carried the sweet decay of autumn, and the afternoon sun filtered through branches that had just begun to turn gold and crimson. It was his day off from the custom furniture orders that paid their bills, and he had learned to treasure these quiet moments with his daughter. Lily was a force of nature, all boundless energy and unstoppable curiosity. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's gray eyes, and she talked constantly, a running commentary on everything she observed. Today's obsession was insects. She had already cataloged 3 different types of beetles, 2 species of ants, and something she insisted was a baby grasshopper. "Daddy, look," she called out, crouching near a massive oak tree. Marcus looked up from his thoughts. Sure enough, a small boy sat alone beneath the oak, completely motionless except for his eyes, which tracked something on the ground before him. The child appeared to be around 5 years old, well dressed in clothes that probably cost more than Marcus earned in a week. But what caught Marcus's attention was not the expensive jacket or the polished shoes. It was the quality of the boy's stillness, the absolute containment of a child who had learned to make himself invisible. He watched as Lily approached the boy with her characteristic lack of restraint. "Hey, do you like bugs too? I'm Lily." The boy did not respond, did not even look up. But Marcus noticed something crucial from his observation post on the bench. The boy's ear had twitched slightly at Lily's voice. His breathing had changed. He was not deaf or unaware. He was choosing silence. Something stirred in Marcus's memory. A different life. A different version of himself who had spent years learning to decode exactly this kind of withdrawal. Across the clearing, a woman sat on another bench, a laptop open on her knees, though her eyes kept drifting toward the boy under the tree. She wore business casual attire that somehow looked both expensive and exhausted. When she saw Lily approach her son, she started to rise, her expression carrying the weary protectiveness of someone who had spent years shielding her child from uncomfortable questions. But then she paused. Because her son, the boy who had not interacted with another child in 2 years, was not walking away. Lily did not ask why the boy was quiet. She simply sat down beside him on the carpet of fallen leaves and began to talk. "That's a really cool beetle you're watching. I think it's a June bug, but my dad knows more about bugs than me. He knows about everything, actually. My mom used to say he was the smartest person she ever met. But she's in heaven now, so I guess she meets smarter people there." The boy's eyes lifted briefly to Lily's face, then returned to the beetle. "Do you want to see my bug collection? I don't actually collect them because that's mean. I just remember them. Like that one I found last week? It was green and shiny, like a little emerald." Marcus rose from his bench and walked slowly toward the children, not to pull Lily away, as the watching mother clearly expected, but to lower himself onto the ground beside them, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that sudden movements could shatter fragile moments. He picked up the beetle gently, cradling it in his palm where both children could see. "This is a June bug," he said, his voice soft and unhurried. His eyes rested on the beetle, but his attention was entirely focused on the silent boy. "Strange thing is, it's October. They usually disappear by September." The boy leaned almost imperceptibly closer. "See how the shell has this greenish-blue shine? That's called iridescence. The color changes depending on how the light hits it." Marcus turned his hand slightly, letting the autumn sunlight catch the beetle's carapace. "Some scientists think it helps them attract mates. Others think it confuses predators. Nobody knows for certain." The boy's lips parted slightly. His eyes never left the beetle. "They spend most of their lives underground, you know. Just larvae in the dark, eating roots. Then one summer, something tells them it's time to come up. Time to fly, even if it's scary up here." even if they don't know what's waiting for them. Marcus extended his hand slowly, offering the beetle to the boy. You can hold it if you want. It won't hurt you. For a long moment, nothing happened. The October breeze rustled through the oak leaves. Lily held her breath without realizing it. Somewhere in the distance, other children laughed and shouted, their sounds belonging to a different world entirely. Then, the boy reached out. His small fingers carefully received the beetle, cradling it in his palm exactly as Marcus had done. He stared at the iridescent creature, watching the colors shift and change. He looked up at Marcus. His eyes met the stranger's gray gaze directly. "Bug," he said. The word was barely more than a whisper, rough and unused, like a door that had rusted shut, finally creaking open. But it was unmistakably, undeniably a word. 10 feet away, Victoria's laptop slid from her nerveless fingers onto the grass. She had heard it, that single syllable that represented everything she had prayed for during 2 years of silent nights. Her son had spoken. She did not remember standing up, did not remember crossing the distance between them. She only knew that suddenly she was there, her designer slacks pressed into the dirt and leaves, her vision blurred with tears she could not stop. "Ethan," she managed. You. Ethan looked at his mother, then down at the beetle still resting in his hand. He did not seem to understand why she was crying. He had only said a word. A simple word for a simple thing. Marcus rose to his feet, stepping back to give them space. He understood what had just happened, even if the boy did not. He had seen this moment before, in another life, with other children. The first crack in a dam that had held back everything. Lily tugged at her father's hand, her voice hushed with the gravity that even a 6-year-old could sense. "Why is she crying, Daddy?" Marcus placed his hand on his daughter's head, smoothing her wild auburn hair. "Because her son just did something very brave." Victoria knelt in the dirt, tears streaming down her face, unable to form coherent words. 2 years. 24 months of specialists and therapies and sleepless nights, and her son's first word had come in a park, offered to a stranger, inspired by a beetle. The man stood a respectful distance away, his daughter pressed against his leg. There was something in his eyes that Victoria could not quite identify. Understanding, yes. Something that looked almost like recognition. After several minutes, Victoria managed to compose herself enough to stand. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, not caring that her mascara was certainly ruined, that she probably looked nothing like the polished CEO who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals. She approached the stranger carefully, as if he might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Who are you?" Her voice came out raw, unguarded in a way she had not permitted herself in years. "What do you do? I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the best specialists in the country, and not one of them accomplished in 2 years what you just did in 10 minutes. The man's expression shifted, something complicated moving behind his gray eyes. He glanced down at his daughter, then back at Victoria, and she could see him weighing something, deciding how much to reveal. "I used to be a speech-language pathologist," he said finally. "Before my wife died." The words hung in the autumn air between them. "Before my wife died." 4 words that explained everything and nothing at all. "I'm Victoria Ashford," she said. "And that's my son, Ethan. He hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years. Not to me, not to anyone. Until just now." Marcus Cole. He gestured to the girl, still clutching his hand. "This is my daughter, Lily. Work with Ethan." The words came out before Victoria could stop them, driven by a desperation she had stopped trying to hide. "I'll pay whatever you ask. Name your price." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't do that work anymore. This isn't work." Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "This is a chance. A second chance. For my son." She paused, seeing something flicker in his expression. "And maybe for you." The silence stretched between them. Lily looked up at her father with curious eyes. On the ground nearby, Ethan still sat with the beetle in his palm, watching the adults with an intensity that suggested he understood more than his years should allow. "Please," Victoria said. The word cost her something. She was not a woman who begged. Lily tugged at her father's hand again. "Daddy, can we play with Ethan more? He knows lots about bugs. I can tell." Marcus looked down at his daughter, then at the boy on the ground, then at the desperate mother standing before him with ruined makeup and raw hope in her eyes. "I won't take money," he said finally. "But if you want, we could meet here again. Same time next week. Let things happen naturally." Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. This stranger had just given her something that all her wealth and power had failed to purchase. A crack in the wall that had surrounded her son for 2 years. As they prepared to leave, gathering belongings and brushing leaves from clothes, Ethan did something that made both adults freeze in place. He walked to where Lily stood and held out his hand. In his palm sat the June bug, its iridescent shell catching the fading afternoon light. He did not speak, but the gesture was unmistakable. A gift. The first thing he had willingly given to anyone outside his family in 2 years. Lily accepted the beetle with the solemnity of a child receiving a sacred trust. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll take really good care of him." Ethan nodded once, then returned to his mother's side. Victoria stared at the scene with new tears threatening to fall. Her son had spoken a word. Her son had given a gift. In one afternoon, 2 years of frozen silence had begun to thaw. That night, Marcus could not sleep. He lay in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to Lily's soft breathing through the wall that separated their rooms, and felt the past pressing against him like a physical weight. He had not thought about his old career in months, had trained himself not to think about it, the way recovering addicts trained themselves not to think about their substance of choice, because thinking about it meant thinking about Sarah, and thinking about Sarah meant drowning in a grief he had never learned to swim through. Finally, he rose and pulled a cardboard box from beneath his bed. Inside lay the artifacts of his former life. His master's degree in speech-language pathology from Boston University, his certification from the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, a photograph from his wedding day, Sarah laughing in her white dress as he tried and failed to cut the cake without making a mess, and his hospital ID badge, Boston Children's Hospital, Speech-Language Pathology Department. The photo showed a younger version of himself, a man who still believed that love and hard work could fix anything. Sarah had died on a Tuesday evening, driving to pick him up from that same hospital after a late shift. A drunk driver had run a red light at 40 miles per hour. She was pronounced dead on arrival in the emergency room where Marcus had spent years helping children find their voices. He had been filling out patient notes 3 floors up when it happened, completely unaware that his entire world was ending in the building's basement. He could not go back there, could not walk those hallways knowing what they had taken from him. So he had quit, sold their house in Cambridge, bought a smaller place in Brookline with a garage he converted into a workshop, taught himself carpentry from YouTube videos and library books, built furniture for children because it was the only way he could still use his hands to help them without confronting everything he had lost. Lily did not remember her mother clearly. She had been 2 when Sarah died, but she knew the stories Marcus told her, the photographs that covered their walls, the way her father sometimes paused mid-sentence when something reminded him of the woman they had both loved. Marcus put the box away and walked to his workshop. The smell of sawdust and wood oil calmed him the way meditation never could. He ran his hands over the rocking horse he was building for a client's daughter, feeling the grain beneath his fingers. The boy in the park had stirred something he thought was buried. Not just his professional instincts, though those had certainly awakened. Something deeper, a sense of purpose he had abandoned along with his career. Across town, in a house that could have contained 6 of Marcus's, Victoria Ashford sat in her home office conducting her own investigation. A Google search for Marcus Cole had revealed a trail of articles from 4 years ago. Rising star at Boston Children's Hospital, specialist in selective mutism and childhood trauma, published research on alternative therapeutic approaches. Then nothing. A complete disappearance from professional life following a brief obituary notice for Sarah Cole, age 32, survived by her husband Marcus and daughter Lily. Margaret Ashford found her daughter still staring at the computer screen at midnight. The older woman moved carefully these days, her left hip never quite recovering from the accident that had stolen her grandson's voice, but her mind remained sharp as ever. "You're researching him," Margaret said. It was not a question. Victoria nodded, not bothering to minimize the screen. He was one of the best in his field, specialized in exactly what Ethan has. Then his wife died and he just stopped. Margaret lowered herself into the chair beside her daughter. "Victoria, you've spent 2 years trying to buy your way to a solution, hiring the most expensive experts, flying in specialists from other countries, and today, a man who has lost everything just like we almost did was able to reach Ethan when none of them could. I offered to pay him. He refused." "Good." Margaret's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Some things cannot be purchased. This man has already lost his wife. He is raising his daughter alone. He gave up his career rather than face the place where his wife died." She paused, letting the words settle. "And despite all of that, he still has enough left inside him to help a stranger's child. That is not an employee, Victoria. That is something much rarer, a potential friend." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed her laptop and looked at her mother. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted. "I know how to negotiate contracts and acquire companies. I don't know how to just let something happen." Margaret smiled, reaching out to pat her daughter's hand. "Then perhaps this is your opportunity to learn." That night, Victoria sat beside Ethan's bed, as she did every night, but instead of singing, she told him about the June bug, how it lived underground for years before emerging into the light, how it had beautiful colors that changed when you looked at it from different angles. Ethan lay with his eyes open, watching her face as she spoke. When she finished, he did something that made her breath catch in her throat. He raised his small hand and touched his own lips. Then he reached out and touched her lips. It was not a word, but it was communication. A new kind of bridge across the silence that separated them. Victoria took his hand and held it against her cheek, tears sliding silently down her face. Progress came in many forms. Tonight, she would take whatever she could get. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Every Saturday afternoon, 2 families met at Lars Anderson Park. Marcus would bring sandwiches from the deli near his workshop. Victoria would bring thermoses of hot cocoa that Ethan refused to drink but Lily devoured. The children would play, or rather Lily would play while Ethan observed with increasing engagement, and the adults would talk. Ethan's progress came in small increments. Single words emerged slowly, offered exclusively to Lily, as if the 6-year-old girl were a safe harbor in waters too dangerous for adults. Leaf, bird, cold, and always, whenever he spotted one, bug. Marcus did not push. He understood, from years of training and experience, that pressure was the enemy of progress in cases like Ethan's. The boy's silence was not defiance or inability. It was protection, a fortress he had built around himself after watching his grandmother nearly die. The walls would come down only when he felt safe enough to let them. Lily became an unconscious therapist, accepting her friend's limitations without question or judgment. She narrated their play constantly, filling the silence with stories and observations and questions that required no answers. "Ethan wants to see the caterpillar," she would announce when the boy pointed at something. "Ethan thinks that cloud looks like a dinosaur." She translated his gestures and expressions into words, giving voice to his silence without demanding that he speak for himself. The conversations between Marcus and Victoria deepened gradually. She told him about Richard, about the shame of admitting that the father of her child had called him broken, and walked away, about the loneliness of running an empire while feeling completely powerless in the face of her son's suffering. Marcus told her about Sarah, about the guilt of surviving when she had died driving to pick him up, about the terror of raising Lily alone, of being responsible for another human being when some days he could barely take care of himself. They discovered unexpected common ground. Both had built walls after their respective tragedies. Victoria's were made of work and wealth, Marcus's of sawdust and solitude. Both had poured everything they had into their children because their children were all they had left. "I run a company with 2,000 employees," Victoria said during their fourth Saturday meeting. "I've negotiated with senators and sued media conglomerates, and once talked a hostile board into a complete reversal, but I can't help my own son say a complete sentence." Marcus watched Lily and Ethan examining something in the grass nearby. "You're helping him right now. Every time you're with him without demanding anything, you're telling him he's enough exactly as he is. That's not nothing. That's everything." Victoria looked at him then, really looked, and he saw something shift in her expression, a crack in her own carefully maintained walls. Their moment was interrupted by Victoria's phone buzzing with a text message. She glanced at the screen, and Marcus watched the color drain from her face. "What is it?" Victoria's voice came out hollow. "My ex-husband. He wants to see Ethan. His lawyers will be in touch. I thought he didn't want custody." "He didn't." Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she put the phone away. "But apparently he's running for city council now, and a devoted father fighting to see his son makes a better campaign story than a man who abandoned his family." The storm broke 4 days later. Richard Whitmore appeared at Victoria's office with a lawyer and a photographer, the latter allegedly for a profile in Boston Magazine, but obviously intended to document his performance as a caring father. He demanded visitation rights. He implied that Victoria had been keeping Ethan from him. He used words like alienation and parental rights and best interest of the child while his lawyer took notes, and his smile never reached his eyes. Victoria sat behind her desk and felt the old anger rising, the protective fury of a mother who had spent 2 years fighting for her child while this man contributed nothing but silence and a monthly check. "You called him broken," she said quietly. "You said you didn't sign up to raise a damaged child. I have witnesses. I have your own emails declining to attend his therapy sessions." Richard's smile flickered but held. "People say things they don't mean during difficult divorces. I've had time to reflect, to grow, and now I want to be part of my son's life. You want to use him for a photo opportunity. I want to be his father." Richard leaned forward, his politician's mask firmly in place. "And family courts tend to support a child's right to know both parents, even when one parent has been monopolizing access." That evening, Marcus brought Lily to Victoria's house for the first time. Margaret had offered to watch the children while the adults talked, but the tension in the house was palpable. Ethan, sensitive to his mother's distress, had retreated into silence even deeper than usual. He would not even look at Lily, sitting in the corner of the playroom with his arms wrapped around his knees. Lily, with the intuition of a child who had navigated her own share of grief, simply sat down a few feet away from him and began quietly sorting through a box of toy cars. She did not try to engage him. She just made herself present, a steady companion in his storm. Marcus found Victoria in the darkened living room, sitting alone on a couch that probably cost more than his workshop equipment. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said, sitting down beside her. Victoria laughed without humor. "I know that, but knowing doesn't help when your child starts regressing because he can feel your fear." He stopped talking again, even to Lily. "It's like the past 4 weeks never happened. He stopped talking because he's trying to protect you." Victoria looked at him sharply. "What?" "Ethan understands more than we give him credit for. He feels your anxiety, and in his mind, the way to help is to retreat, to make himself smaller, to not add to your burden." Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. "That's actually a sign of progress. In a strange way, he's responding to emotional cues. He's connected enough to you to want to protect you." Victoria stared at him in the darkness. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I've seen it before. in dozens of kids over the years. He hesitated. And because it's what I did, after Sarah, I tried to make myself invisible because I thought my grief was hurting Lily. I thought if I could just contain it, keep it locked away, she wouldn't have to carry any of it. Did it work? No. Kids always know. They can't articulate it, but they know. Marcus turned to face her fully. What worked was being honest, letting her see that sadness was okay, that we could carry it together. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping us? You don't owe us anything. You barely know us." Marcus looked toward the playroom, where he could hear Lily's soft voice narrating something to Ethan. "When I look at you with Ethan, I see Sarah. How she would have fought for Lily. How she would have torn apart the world if anyone threatened our daughter." His voice caught slightly. I didn't get to tell her that. How much I admired her strength. How grateful I was to have her as a partner in raising our child. She died before I could say any of it. He met Victoria's eyes in the dim light. Maybe helping you is my way of saying it now. Of honoring who she was, by being there for another mother who's fighting the same fight. Victoria reached out in the darkness and took his hand. Neither of them spoke. The connection required no words. A week later, Marcus proposed something radical. "Bring Ethan to my workshop," he said during their Saturday park meeting. Sometimes, busy hands help open quiet mouths. Victoria hesitated. The workshop represented Marcus's private world, the sanctuary he had built after losing everything. Inviting them there felt significant in ways she did not fully understand. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded. "I've been thinking about it all week. There's something about working with wood, the focus required, the physical engagement. It takes the pressure off verbal communication because there's always something else to do with your energy." They went the following Thursday. Marcus's workshop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, the scent of things being made rather than destroyed. Tools hung in neat rows on pegboard walls. Half-finished projects lined the workbenches, children's furniture in various states of completion. Lily immediately began showing Ethan around, pointing out her father's works in progress with proprietary pride. "That's going to be a rocking horse, and that's a bookshelf shaped like a tree. Daddy makes the best stuff." Marcus set the children up at a low workbench with a simple project. A wooden box for collecting insects. Just 4 walls, a floor, a lid with a mesh window. He showed them how to sand the pieces smooth, guiding their small hands over the wood. For an hour, the workshop filled with the sounds of sandpaper on pine and Lily's constant chatter. Ethan worked in silence, but his silence was different now. Engaged rather than retreated. Present rather than protected. Then came the moment that would change everything. Ethan needed a piece of wood that Lily was using. He reached for it, then stopped. Looked at Marcus. Looked at Lily. His mouth opened and closed. "Lily." His voice cracked on the word. Both adults froze. Victoria, standing in the doorway, pressed her hand against her mouth. "Please?" 2 words. A complete thought. A sentence. Lily handed over the wood as if nothing remarkable had happened. "Here you go." I was done with it anyway. But Marcus saw Victoria's shoulders shaking. Saw her turn away to hide tears she could not control. Her son had just spoken his first sentence in over 2 years, and it had been a request, an expression of want. A reach toward connection rather than retreat from it. That evening, the 4 of them sat on the workshop floor eating pizza from boxes balanced on sawhorses. Sawdust covered their clothes. Ethan had wood shavings in his hair. For the first time, it felt like something that none of them had expected and all of them desperately needed. It felt like family. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late November. Victoria arrived at the courthouse with her lawyers, her mother, and a quiet terror that no amount of professional preparation could fully address. Richard had mounted a convincing public campaign over the preceding weeks. Local news had run sympathetic features about the successful businessman fighting to reconnect with his estranged son. Nobody mentioned that the estrangement was entirely his choice. Marcus sat in the gallery with Lily, their presence a silent statement of support. Victoria had not asked them to come. They had simply shown up. The proceedings unfolded with excruciating slowness. Richard's lawyers painted a picture of a devoted father unfairly excluded from his son's life. They produced character witnesses who testified to his reformed priorities. They suggested that Victoria's demanding career had left her unable to provide adequate attention to a special needs child. Then, Victoria's lawyers presented their evidence. Emails from Richard declining to participate in Ethan's therapy, text messages calling his son damaged and broken, financial records showing that he had never once voluntarily increased his child support despite his substantial income. Testimony from the therapists he had refused to meet. The turning point came when the judge asked to hear from Ethan himself. A child psychologist had been appointed to facilitate the conversation, to translate if necessary, to ensure the boy was not pressured or coached. Ethan sat in a small chair that made him look even younger than his 5 years. His eyes found his mother in the courtroom. Then they moved to the gallery, where Marcus and Lily sat together. The psychologist asked gentle questions. Did Ethan understand why they were there? Did he have anything he wanted to share? For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Victoria felt her heart fracturing with every second of silence. This was it. Her son would retreat into his protective shell, and the judge would see only a child too damaged to express a preference. Then Ethan spoke. "I want to stay with Mommy." His voice was soft but clear. The courtroom went absolutely still. And Lily, Victoria's hand found Marcus's mother's arm, gripping tight enough to leave marks. And Mr. Marcus, Richard's face went pale. His carefully constructed narrative crumbled in the space of 3 short sentences. His son, the child he had called broken, had found his voice just long enough to reject him completely. The judge ruled in Victoria's favor. Sole custody remained with the mother. Visitation would be available only if Richard completed a parenting course and demonstrated sustained interest in his son's therapeutic progress. Given his track record, everyone in the courtroom knew this meant visitation would never happen. In the courthouse hallway afterward, Victoria found herself surrounded by lawyers offering congratulations and journalists requesting comments. She ignored them all, pushing through the crowd to where Marcus stood holding Lily's hand. She did not speak, simply wrapped her arms around him and held on, trembling with relief and exhaustion and something else she was not ready to name. Lily tugged at her father's jacket. "Does this mean we can keep playing with Ethan?" Marcus laughed, the sound rough with emotion. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think it does." In the weeks that followed, new possibilities began to emerge. Dr. Helen Marsh, Marcus's former mentor at Boston Children's Hospital, reached out after hearing about Ethan's progress through professional networks. She had been following cases of selective mutism for decades and was intrigued by the unconventional approach Marcus had stumbled into. "You've essentially created a new therapeutic modality," she said during a video call. "Combining occupational therapy principles with speech-language pathology in a naturalistic setting, the woodworking provides sensory engagement and reduces performance anxiety. The presence of a peer removes the adult pressure dynamic. It's brilliant." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't planned. I just did what felt right. The best therapeutic innovations rarely are planned. They emerge from authentic human connection." Helen paused. "I want you to consider something. A research collaboration, documenting your methods, studying outcomes, potentially developing a reproducible program for other children with selective mutism." Marcus did not answer immediately. The offer represented everything he had walked away from 4 years ago. A return to the professional world, a reconnection with the work that had once defined him. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Victoria made changes of her own. She promoted her chief operating officer to president and stepped back from day-to-day management of Ashford Media. The company would survive without her constant attention. Her son needed her presence more than her employees needed her oversight. "I spent 2 years trying to fix Ethan like he was a broken acquisition," she admitted to Marcus during one of their now daily conversations. "Throwing money and experts at the problem. I never considered that what he needed most was simply more of me." Spring came to Boston with its usual dramatic flourish, winter's grip releasing suddenly into warmth and blooming trees. 6 months had passed since that first encounter in Lars Anderson Park. Marcus and Victoria sat on their familiar bench, watching their children play in the distance. Ethan's vocabulary had expanded dramatically. He spoke in full sentences now, though still primarily to Lily. With adults, he remained cautious, but the fortress walls had become permeable. Words escaped more frequently. Smiles appeared without warning. He had even laughed twice, a sound Victoria had begun to fear she would never hear again. Lily grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward something in the grass. A moment later, Ethan came running back, breathless with excitement. "Mom! Mr. Marcus! Look what we found!" He opened his palm to reveal a beetle with an iridescent green-blue shell. A June bug, appearing right on schedule this time, as spring tilted toward summer. "It's back!" Ethan announced, his face bright with wonder. Victoria and Marcus exchanged a look. Some things that seemed lost forever found their way back. Voices silenced by trauma, hearts closed by grief, lives that had seemed permanently diminished, discovering they still had room to grow. "Bug," Ethan said softly, staring at the creature in his hand. Then he looked up at his mother, at the man who had become so much more than a stranger in a park, at the girl who had become his best friend and his bridge back to the world. "I love you." 3 words. A complete sentence. A declaration that held the weight of 2 years of silence, finally broken. Victoria pulled her son into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Marcus's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. And Lily, refusing to be excluded from the moment, threw herself into the embrace, nearly knocking them all over. 4 people tangled together on the autumn-colored grass of a Boston park. A family built not from blood or marriage, but from something perhaps more durable, from loss that became connection, from silence that became speech, from strangers who became exactly what each other needed. Above them, the June bug's descendants hummed in the warming air, emerging from underground darkness into spring light. The cycle continued. Things ended, things began, and sometimes, in the spaces between ending and beginning, unexpected gifts appeared. A word offered to a stranger. A beetle passed from one small hand to another. A man who had forgotten how to help remembering that he still could. A woman who had tried to buy salvation discovering it was free all along. 2 children finding in each other the friendship that would shape who they became. The park hummed with life around them. Other families came and went, absorbed in their own stories, unaware of the small miracle that had just occurred on a bench beneath an old oak tree. But Marcus and Victoria and Lily and Ethan knew, they would always know. Some things that break can be mended, some silences can be filled. Some people who arrive as strangers become the family you were always meant to find. And sometimes, all it takes is a single word. Bug.